Who's the most popular Final Fantasy VII character? And what would their D&D build look like? I'm ranking them from least to most beloved Final Fantasy VII character and then converting them all into D&D playable characters. Because in Japan, they had a massive ranking of every single Final Fantasy character, which even included random side characters, like Rufus Shinra, who ranked 78th overall, or Reeve, who ranked 160th. And while usually I do an insane deep dive into every character level by level, considering I have to do about 10 different characters in this video, I'm just going to go through the highlights. And in order to go through those highlights, we're going to be focusing more on the limit breaks than anything else, because you can swap out materia and do whatever you want, and that's true for any character, but the limit breaks are what really round out the character, so those are the abilities I need to make sure I get hammered down. As always, the character sheets are up on Patreon, but let's go ahead and dive in, and we are only going to be sticking to main characters from the main game. So unfortunately, Zack Fair isn't going to be making an appearance. But let's start with the least popular character, and frankly, he ranked really low on the list overall, because this was all Final Fantasy characters. And out of almost 200 different characters, he ranked 198th overall, and 10th on this list, Barret Wallace. Barret has some big limit breaks with Big Shot, Mind Blow, Grenade Bomb, Hammer Blow, Satellite Beam, Anger Max, and Catastrophe. But you still need to make sure you cover the fundamentals of the character, and Barret very obviously replaced his hand with a machine gun. And one of the best ways to reproduce that ability, outside of actually getting a machine gun in D&D, which is a usable weapon nowadays, but those aren't always allowed in every D&D campaign. So another way to go about it is by going with a machine gun build. And for those that don't know what a machine gun build is, it's when you take the Warlock cantrip Eldritch Blast, which in the 2024 version of D&D, you can basically only get by being a Warlock, so we need to take at least one level there, and then take one more level while you're in Warlock to get the Eldritch Invocation, Agonizing Blast. This allows you to then add your Charisma to every single blast that comes out of your Eldritch Blast, because Eldritch Blast, as a cantrip, levels up at certain breakpoints in D&D like level 5, level 11, and level 17, not by just increasing damage, but by increasing the amount of beams that shoot out when you activate this cantrip. An Agonizing Blast allows you to add your Charisma to each one of those beams, really amplifying your damage to an insane degree. But what makes it a true machine gun build is that you immediately want to take some levels in Sorcerer. And after 2024 updates to D&D, after taking at least 2 levels in Sorcerer, you're able to choose some meta magic options, allowing you to alter your spells in various ways. This will then allow you to get a meta magic for Quicken spell, allowing you to spend 2 sorcery points, and sorcery points are a number of points that you're able to use as a sorcerer, which are equal to the amount of levels that you have in sorcerer. But Quicken spell allows you to take a spell that would usually take an action to cast, and cast it as a bonus action. So then you are able to take your action and bonus action to cast Eldritch Blast, really turning it into much more of a machine gun. Because once you hit 17th level overall, which is a very high level in D&D, you get 4 beams per casting of Eldritch Blast. If you can do it as your action and bonus action, that's 8 beams, and that is a lot to shoot out, especially in D&D. Now, there used to be a great way to amp this up even further by mixing in at least a couple levels of fighter, because they have the ability Action Surge, and you would be able to get another cantrip out, but unfortunately, after the 2024 update, they specified that Action Surge cannot be used for a magic action, probably specifically because people were doing things like this, because that would turn it into 12 beams that you shoot out per turn, each one adding your Charisma modifier. And for those that might argue that Barret is a little too grumpy to focus on Charisma, he does lead an entire organizations by being a leader within Avalanche, so I think it's justifiable that he would have some charisma in order to be able to gather people together like that. Once you get past having an actual machine gun, you need to be able to activate his limit breaks, and Sorcerer makes that kind of easy. We've got Big Shot, which is just one big blast at somebody, and you can just as easily swap out your Eldritch Blast for a Firebolt if you want it to be a single shot. And when you choose a sorcerer subclass, you can take Draconic Sorcerer. So then you can focus on boosting up your damage with fire spells. So if you activate Firebolt, you can then add your Charisma modifier to it for the lowest level limit break. We have Mind Blow to drain MP from a single enemy, and the best way to replicate that is with the spell Silence. Then of course, there's Grenade Bomb, where you need to deal a bunch of damage to a bunch of creatures. And one of the most iconic and easy ways to pull this off is with a classic spell, Fireball. Then there's also the limit break Hammer Blow, which does have more of a physical aspect to it, hitting much more up close, but with the new True Strike cantrip in D&D, it's actually pretty easy to pull that off, because True Strike allows you to focus on your spellcasting modifier and then it boosts up the damage of a physical attack. There's Satellite Beam, allowing you to shoot out a fiery death beam at a bunch of different creatures, and the best way to pull that off is Scorching Ray. Then there's Anger Max, which is just basically unloading an entire clip onto somebody, which technically fires 18 shots. So the best way I would use this is by using your meta magic option to use a Quicken spell, allowing you to swap either a cantrip or a spell, it doesn't really matter, to your bonus action. With up to 4 shots from your Eldritch Blast, that's a decent amount, then do a very high level casting of Magic Missile. This allows you to fire off a ton all at once, because Magic Missile just shoots out a bunch of darts over and over again, and then if you're just following that up with an Eldritch Blast, that is a ton of blasting. Then there's Catastrophe, his highest level limit break, but it is just one massive blast. Now there are some pretty powerful 9th level spells that you might be able to utilize, but those tend to target more wide areas and be multiple blasts instead. I'm looking at you, Meteor Swarm, but I think a slightly better way to pull it off is with one solid blast, so I would grab Sunburst. It's an 8th level evocation spell. It has a 60-foot radius blast. It blinds a bunch of creatures at the same time and does 12d6 radiant damage. And that would cover all of his limit breaks. And in order to cover all of that, that would just bring my version of his build to 3 levels of Warlock just to get a subclass in there. Probably grabbing the Fiend Patron because that boosts our survivability a bit. And Barret looks like he would have a decent amount of HP. And the Fiend Patron does give you Dark One's Blessing, so when you reduce a creature to 0 hit points, you get some temp HP equal to your charisma modifier plus your warlock level, and then you can follow it up with 17 levels in warlock. Making sure to have that quicken spell. You have innate sorcery at 1st level of sorcerer, allowing you to increase the saving throw required to succeed against your spells by 1, or giving you advantage in all of your attack rolls for sorcerer spells, and then going with a draconic sorcerer, making you even more hardy because you get draconic resilience, boosting up the HP that you get by +1 per sorcerer level, and you have an armor class equal to 10 plus your dexterity modifier plus your charisma modifier, and you have elemental affinity, so you can add your charisma modifier to fire damage, and overall I think that really rounds out the idea of Barret. Then next up on the popularity level, I'm very surprised at how high he ranked considering I'm not a huge fan of the character, but it's actually Cait Sith, ranking 90th overall out of almost 200 characters ranked on the list, and 9th when it comes to main playable characters from Final Fantasy VII, it's Cait Sith. And when it comes to Cait Sith, we have more of a cat-like creature, so we're gonna go with a Tabaxi. They're probably the most cat-like out of any creature in D&D. But Cait Sith is a little more unique in a few random ways that make him a little more challenging. So first we need to get the fundamentals of who Cait Sith is. He is a small cat that rides on the back of a huge stuffed Mog he magically brought to life. And that's the first thing we need to sort out. And I was very hesitant to even come out with this video partially because of this, because I know D&D is coming out with an update for this particular class very soon, but I just couldn't wait any longer to make this video. So I'm gonna be starting off with an artificer. We need to get the fact that you are riding on some sort of thing that you brought to life yourself. And since the Mog is definitely not a living object, we can't go with something like a Beastmaster Ranger. So instead, we're gonna go with this artificer and take it at least 3 levels to get your artificer subclass, because then we can choose a battlesmith. Artificers in general are great with tools, they can build lots of stuff. Battlesmiths specifically get additional proficiencies and can use martial weapons. But the entire reason that we needed these 3 levels at all is because we need a steel defender. Battlesmiths can make a steel defender, which is a medium construct, and if you are a small creature, you can ride on the back of a medium-sized creature. They have some basic abilities like a force-empowered rend, so they can hit somebody with your spell attack modifier, and the damage they deal scales with your proficiency bonus, so you don't have to worry as much about your spell modifier, because we're going to do a weird multi-class in a second. Your steel defender can repair itself a bit, and it can deflect attacks. But once you get 3 levels in Artificer, that's all I want to take there, because we have to do another multi-class just for Cait Sith's limit break, because he only has 1, making this very easy. But it is entirely random on what he can do. And in order to exemplify this idea, I'm again gonna go ahead and multi-class into Sorcerer. And being a more charisma-focused character also helps because we want to make sure he gets proficiency in Deception, because he is kind of the backstabber of the group, which I'm not going to dive too in depth on in case that's a spoiler for anybody, but I would simply take the rest of the levels in Sorcerer, because you still get your meta magic options, you get ways to alter spells, that's all fine. But in order to sort out his limit break, where he's literally just rolling a dice and something random happens, the best way to pull this off is by taking the Sorcerer subclass Wild Magic Sorcery, because this gives tides of chaos and all sorts of ways to alter your luck. But specifically when it comes to rolling a dice and something random happens, you have a giant Wild Magic Surge table that forces you to roll a D100, and whatever you roll changes whatever happens on this table. You can cast all sorts of random spells or get transported to another plane of existence. The randomness about this is what I wanted to focus on for this limit break. And I should note, there are tons of altered versions of this Wild Magic Surge table out there. So if you think the Wild Magic Surge table from the Player's Handbook is a little too boring, you can find tons of insanely chaotic ones all over the internet. But that allows me to keep Cait Sith fairly simple. He's a little bit weird with his ability scores because you need at least 13 intelligence for your 3 levels in Artificer, and then you want to focus more on sorcery, so you're going to boost up your charisma. But I would just keep it simple with 3 levels in Battlesmith Artificer and 17 levels in Wild Magic Sorcerer. And being so simple is helpful because then I can move right along to the next character in the popularity list, ranking 59th amongst all Final Fantasy characters, and 8th in this list. We have Cid Highwind, a classic Dragoon type character in the more Final Fantasy class system. Cid is another fairly straightforward type of character. You're gonna go with human to keep him simple, but we need to focus more on a polearm focused character because that's sort of his iconic bread and butter. However, he does have a limit break where he can throw dynamite, he can heal himself, and he can launch a bunch of missiles. Outside of that, most of his limit breaks involve just stabbing people more with his big ol' spear. So I would probably just stick with a fighter for him. Getting the most out of your spear usage is kind of the best part of Cid, and becoming a fighter does give us more ability score improvements than any other class in D&D. The only thing it makes us lack is the dynamite throw, the self-heal, and the launching missiles part. And honestly, just to handle a simple explosion, you would usually go with something like Fireball, but that feels a little too simplistic, and there's other things I need to make sure I focus on with Cid. So I think the best way to go about it is by giving him the Sage background. This allows him to take the Magic Initiate feat right away. It will allow us to use Intelligence for our casting modifier, and we can at least get 1 low-level spell because his Dynamite Throw is kind of one of his early limit breaks, so having it being a lower level spell would work pretty well. So I would just grab Thunder Wave. It's a first level spell, it does an AoE attack, and it's something to get Dynamite Throw out of the way. Then we can cover the rest of his limit breaks with just our fighter stuff without forcing us to go with something like an Eldritch Knight, because they don't want to just use spells to recreate every ability. Instead, going with a fighter gives us Second Wind for a self-heal, because Second Wind allows you to heal a number of hit points equal to 1d10 plus your fighter level, and you can stick with fighter all the way to level 20, getting weapon mastery with every polearm imaginable, especially things like a halberd. You get more ability score improvements than anybody else skills, so you definitely have the extra room to grab the feats. Great Weapon Master for heavy weapon mastery, which allows you to hit a creature with a weapon that has the heavy property, and as part of the attack action on your turn, you can cause the weapon to deal extra damage to the target equal to your proficiency bonus, which it used to do way more damage pre-2024, but this balanced it out a bit. And it also makes it so you have the feature Hew, so when you score a critical hit with a melee weapon, or you reduce a creature to 0 hit points, you can make another attack as your bonus action. And you can also grab the feat Polearm Master, so you get the feature Pole Strike, so immediately after you take the attack action with a quarterstaff, a spear, or any weapon that has the heavy and reach properties, you can use a bonus action to make a melee attack with the opposite end of the weapon, dealing bludgeoning damage, and the damage die is just a 1d4. But it's a way to always have a guaranteed bonus action attack. And you get the feature Reactive Strike. So when you're holding any sort of quarterstaff or spear or weapon that has the heavy and reach properties, you can take a reaction to make one melee attack against a creature that enters your reach when you have the weapon. And since many of these weapons have the reach property, increasing your range by 5 feet with the melee weapon, that means you can make that reaction before they even get to you. But when it comes to a fighter subclass, since we already have the dynamite throw covered in its basics and the self-heal, I want to make sure you can leap into the air and really utilize coming down with that spear like pretty much every Dragoon is known for in the Final Fantasy games. So I would take the fighter subclass, Psi Warrior. This gives you psionic energy dice, which you can use for things like protecting yourself with Protective Field, or Psionic Strike, boosting up your damage with your weapons, or Telekinetic Movement to move around the battlefield much more easily. But once you hit 7th level of being a Psi Warrior, you get Psi Powered Leap. So as a bonus action, you gain a fly speed, but it allows you to leap up into the air and slam down with your spear. And you can get Telekinetic Thrust, knocking down a creature when you hit with your Psionic Strike ability. But the one thing that we're still missing is launching a bunch of missiles. But once you hit 18th level of Psi Warrior, you automatically get the spell Telekinesis. And each of your turns, when you're maintaining concentration on the Telekinesis spell, you can make a weapon attack as a bonus action. But even with just having Telekinesis, you're moving stuff around, you're basically launching missiles at somebody if that's what you want to roleplay it at. I think it's a great way to recreate all of Cid's abilities without focusing too much on spellcasting, because he never felt like much of a spellcaster to me. He still gets plenty of spear attacking, because fighters get up to 3 extra attacks, giving 4 attacks as a single attack action, and they get Action Surge, so they can do that twice in a single turn. And we have every way possible to attack with a bonus action as well, giving you up to 9 attacks in a turn. You have Telekinetic Master to rain down missiles, you can jump up high into the air and slam down with your spear, you have a mini dynamite with Thunderwave, and you have a way to heal yourself with Second Wind. And I think that covers pretty much every aspect of being Cid. Then going up the list, we have the 50th most popular character in all of Final Fantasy, and 7th on this list, Red 13. Now, Red 13 is a very intelligent creature, and while I'm not a huge fan of what they did with some of his characterizations in the Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, I always thought he was still kinda cool. He is much more cat-like, but in his physical distinctions listed on the fandom wiki, his physical distinctions actually list him as being very lion-like, and I want to hammer in on this so I don't have to go with 2 Tabaxi characters in a single video. So instead, I'm going to go with a Leonin for his species, which are basically lion-type creatures. This gives the feature Claws, so they can make an unarmed strike using their claws, dealing a 1d4 plus their strength modifier instead of bludgeoning damage for their unarmed strikes. And they get the feature Daunting Roar, so they can force creatures to make a wisdom saving throw versus your constitution modifier. Otherwise, creatures are going to get frightened. But because I always viewed him as fairly intelligent, he has a solid mix of physical and more casting abilities slash stats, and because of everything I have to get through with his limit break abilities, I'm going to go with a wizard, especially since there are very specific spells I need to make sure I grab that wizards are one of the only casters that get access to them. Then before we dive into the spells, we need to sort out the wizard subclass, because there's a very obvious wizard subclass, which is probably going to get an update very soon in D&D, but I'm not going to wait for that just to make this video, and that would be a blade singing wizard. They're very good at both physical and magical stuff, but Red 13 doesn't really focus on using any sort of blade, and the whole thing about a blade singer is that they very iconically use an actual physical weapon. So in order to not focus on that, while at the same time being able to utilize fighting up close and personal, we're going to go with a War Magic Wizard. This is usable from Xanathar's Guide to Everything. They get abilities like Arcane Deflection, allowing you to use your reaction to get a +2 bonus to your armor class, or a +4 bonus to your saving throw. You get Tactical Wit, so you can actually act more quickly in battle, allowing you to get a bonus to your initiative rolls equal to your intelligence modifier. You have Power Surge, dealing extra damage with a spell equal to half of your wizard level. You get Durable Magic, so while maintaining concentration on a spell, you get +2 to your armor class and all saving throws. You get Deflecting Shroud to deflect some damage back at your enemies, and overall, it's just a bit more defensive stuff to add into your wizard arsenal. But we need to focus on the spells, because Red 13 has Sled Fang, allowing him to dash through and damage enemies, Lunatic High, hasting himself in the party, Blood Fang, allowing him to damage and absorb a bunch of HP and MP, Stardust Ray, blasting enemies with a bunch of stars, Howling Moon, casting haste and berserk on himself, Earth Rave to randomly attack 5 enemies, and Cosmo Memory for one big explosion. But pretty much every one of these can be replicated with some spells in D&D. Sled Fang can be replicated with Steel Wind Strike. Now this would require a weapon, so we will still have to use a weapon somewhat, but throw a dagger in your mouth, you'll be fine with it. And it allows you to dash through somebody, dealing 60-10 force damage. Any limit breaks forcing you to haste yourself or somebody else, like Lunatic High or Howling Moon, just cast haste. It's probably the most simple way to go. It's straight up a direct translation of a D&D spell to a Final Fantasy spell, so I'll take the easy wins where I can get them. And we don't have a great way to absorb MP, but Blood Fang, allowing us to damage and absorb HP, is pretty easy to cover with the 3rd level spell, Vampiric Touch. You can deal 3d6 necrotic damage and regain half of the necrotic damage you deal as health back to yourself. And you can concentrate on this, doing it repeatedly every turn with a magic action. To attack a bunch of people randomly with a bunch of stars, there is a great spell called Crown of Stars. And because of the combination of Crown of Stars and Steel Wind Strike, that is part of why I really had to focus on going with a wizard. Crown of Stars allows you to summon a bunch of stars and fire them off at enemies. Each one deals 4d12 radiant damage. And unless I was going to go with a Stars Druid, it was going to be pretty hard to replicate that ability without this spell. For Earth Rave, randomly attacking 5 creatures, considering it feels like Earth is actually coming up and attacking someone, I would actually go with Erupting Earth. It deals damage in a 20-foot cube, so you can hit multiple creatures. It deals 3d12 bludgeoning damage, and it literally has Earth coming up and hitting people. You can also just as easily upcast Earth Tremor. Considering it's a 1st level spell, you definitely want to upcast it, since Earth Rave is definitely one of the higher level limit breaks, but either one would work pretty well. Then you have Cosmo Memory, which is basically just a big explosion. So I'm going to keep it simple for myself. Grab Delayed Blast, Fireball, and Fireball, and just upcast the crap out of them to make them as strong as possible, because Cosmo Memory is the highest level limit break that Red 13 gets access to. Then finally, jumping back into the popularity list, we get to jump way up from Red 13's 50th all the way up to the 33rd place in all of Final Fantasy, and 6th place on this list, with Yuffie. Now, Yuffie, we have to keep pretty simple. She is very obviously kind of a ninja archetype. Despite the size of the weapon she throws, they are essentially just big daggers, at least in the ninja universe. And if we want to go with more of a ninja-like character, I think it's best to go with a rogue. And then Yuffie has a bunch of limit breaks that we need to cover, and most of them are not particularly rogue-like. Granted, some of them just involve hitting and hitting harder, but then we have ones like Clear Tranquil, so you can heal people for half of their HP. Landscaper, which does a bit more of an AoE attack. Bloodfest is just hitting a bunch of times, but we can just as easily swap that out for hitting extra hard, just to make it a little easier on ourselves. Gauntlet deals some AoE damage. Doom of the Living to hit somebody extra hard, and then All Creation for a big boom. Now, if we want to stick to being more of a ninja-like character, But still able to do all of these things, we need at least one feat, which is easy to get, especially post 2024 when it's so easy to get a starting feat. So we're going to grab a Magic Initiate feat. This allows us to use any casting modifier that we want, while at the same time diving into either a cleric or druid spell list, it doesn't really matter, to make sure we at least get Cure Wounds, because we need some way to heal the party. Now, that's not going to be a very powerful heal, but we'll worry about that in just a second, because first we have to dive into her class. We're going with a rogue. She's the most ninja-like character in Final Fantasy VII. They get all sorts of rogue stuff like steady aim so they can get advantage on an attack. They can pickpocket people to steal their materia with getting expertise in sleight of hand. They can sneak around better with expertise in stealth. And then for every aspect of just hitting extra hard for our limit breaks or anything like that, we're just going to focus on that being our sneak attack damage. We can pretend our kunai is more of a dagger, and daggers very easily can apply sneak attack, because for sneak attack, all you need is one of your allies to be within 5 feet of your enemy, or for you to have advantage on an attack, and it's very easy to get advantage on an attack nowadays, especially with steady aim, and it allows you to add an extra d6 of damage, and you get another d6 for every 2 levels in Rogue. But to make sure we're able to cover all of Yuffie's abilities, you want to go with a rogue subclass like Arcane Trickster. Arcane Trickster is going to give us some spell casting. It gives us things like Magical Ambush, which is basically just a straight up caster rogue thing. In fact, they're even better at stealing materia like Yuffie tends to do, because they can pickpocket people with a mage hand. But this will also allow us to increase the healing of our Magic Initiate Cure Wounds ability, because now we have slightly higher level spell casting. It's still slightly more minimal spellcasting overall, but that's okay. It gives us some way to heal, it gives us a big explosion with something like Fireball, and it does still give us something simple like Landscaper with something like Erupting Earth. It very easily covers all of our bases while still feeling like the classic ninja-esque Yuffie that we've come to know and love. But I'm very happy at how simple she came through, because now we have to jump over to the 22nd most popular Final Fantasy character and 5th on this list, with Vincent Valentine. He is probably one of the more complicated characters to try and build, because all of his limit breaks revolve around transforming into monsters. He is definitely the more edgy character amongst the Final Fantasy VII lineup, but there's actually an absolutely perfect way to build him, and it is unreasonably fitting considering who voices him in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, because we still need some sort of firearm proficiency, which is very easy to get post 2024 in D&D, but Vincent Valentine is voiced by Matt Mercer, one of the more iconic dungeon masters in the world of YouTube D&D. And there happens to be a particular class that was specifically made because of Critical Role, which is what Matt Mercer is kind of known for in the D&D world. And thanks to Critical Role, we have the Blood Hunter class. So not only does this class fit super perfectly for the Vincent Valentine character, but it just so happens to align more perfectly with the fact that he's voiced by Matt Mercer in the Final Fantasy VII Rebirth game. Every one of Vincent Valentine's limit breaks involve him transforming into a monster, and possibly attacking with some sort of elemental damage. Blood Hunters get Crimson Rights, allowing them to deal extra damage of elemental types. So if you're going to do lightning damage, you can do Rite of the Storm. But when it comes to turning into monsters of various types, you get to choose a Blood Hunter Order, which is a Blood Hunter subclass. And when it comes to transforming, there's 2 possible choices. You can go with the Order of the Mutant, which kind of focuses a little more on like poisoning enemies, and that doesn't feel like Vincent. So instead, we're going to go with the Order of the Lycan, which is basically like turning into werewolves and things like that. You can do a hybrid transformation where you get Feral Might, giving you advantage on strength checks and strength saving throws, giving you a +1 bonus to melee damage rolls, which boosts up to a +2 at 11th level and +3 at 18th level. You get Resilient Hide, so you get a +1 bonus to your armor class. You get Predatory Strikes, so you can slash out with any sort of beast-like claws that you manage to harness, or you get Bloodlust to heal some of your HP while you're attacking. They get other physical enhancements by turning into different types of monsters, and they can curse enemies. Overall, it just feels very Vincent Valentine-esque. It's almost like Matt Mercer was thinking of Vincent Valentine when they came up with the Blood Hunter for Critical Role, even though that would be an absolutely insane amount of forethought, considering he got the role to play Vincent Valentine as a voice actor much later than coming up with it in Critical Role. It definitely has that more creepy, edgy vibe. It's just absolutely perfect in every way when it comes to this build. So focus on making sure that you can use a firearm, grab yourself the archery fighting style in the Blood Hunter class, so that way you get a +2 bonus to your accuracy, and then transform into all sorts of ridiculous monsters with the Order of the Lycan, going all 20 levels in Blood Hunter. Then it's time to dive into somebody that's not usually a member of the Final Fantasy VII party, but it's still definitely worth building him, because we're going to go into the more villainous side of Final Fantasy VII with the 11th most popular character in all of Final Fantasy, and the 4th most popular in this list, Sephiroth. And Sephiroth is both more difficult to make and a bit easier because I built him originally on this channel in the old dark days of videos, back before I hardly knew how to edit, and most would probably argue I still don't. But if you're going to build an updated version of Sephiroth, you still got to start with an Aasimar. You need to really play up the whole one-winged angel thing. And one of the main species in D&D that gets any sort of wings is an Aasimar. The updated Aasimar gets some healing abilities, gets the ability to cast the light cantrip, and they have the ability to transform themselves to deal extra damage and embrace some heavenly wings, some inner radiance, or a necrotic shroud. Heavenly wings just gives a flying speed, inner radiance allows you to emanate some radiant damage around you, and necrotic shroud allows you to inflict some fear. Then the big thing is the class. Now there's some very specific abilities that Sephiroth has, especially if you're allowed to dive into the Smash Bros game, because he has some unique abilities there. However, this video is already getting pretty long, and I want to make sure that I cover mostly just the highlight. And honestly, the hardest part about this build for Sephiroth is the ability scores, because you have to basically focus on 3 ability scores simultaneously, on top of the basics for Constitution, so you don't have too little of health. Because the best way to pull them off is by going with a wizard. And you want to go with a blade singing wizard. There is an incoming update to the blade singing wizard from D&D, but utilizing what we have at our disposal right now, they get some great abilities like extra attack, they can get some bonuses to their armor class, and generally they're just made to be able to wield a one-handed weapon while at the same time being a hardcore caster. So since we need to focus on a one-handed weapon, we're gonna grab a longsword. Utilizing a longsword is actually a little easier now, because we would have to put a bunch of points into strength, because there's no way we can avoid being anything but a longsword, because it's Sephiroth, his sword is insanely long, and longswords require strength. However, the new True Strike cantrip that got updated recently is so much better, and it allows you to utilize your spellcasting modifier. So if you're not as worried about just being able to swing without using a cantrip, you can still utilize just your intelligence modifier for as long as possible. The only other things you want to make sure that you don't ignore are your dexterity for a bit more armor class, because mage armor only gets you so far, but blade singing wizards do get a boost to their armor class in general anyways, so it's not overly necessary. And of course, most wizards get access to the spell Shield. But as you level up in Wizard, you'll get tons of great spells that fit really well with Sephiroth. You get Crown of Madness to drive Cloud insane, plenty of sword-based spells like Shadow Blade. You want that more Black Flame type ability with something like Fireball. You can utilize very unique spells like Modify Memory or Synaptic Static. You can dash through somebody and slash with your sword for Steel Wind Strike. Really amp up the whole transformation thing with Tensor's transformation. And then obviously, Sephiroth's kind of obsessed with Meteor, so we'll grab Melp's Minute Meteors. But there's 2 massive spells at 9th level that are both very fitting for Sephiroth. To amp up the whole meteor obsession, you gotta grab Meteor Swarm, and then to make sure you have another massive sword to utilize, grab Blade of Disaster. Overall, there's plenty of ways to amp up his damage, stick true to character while still being a generally intimidating antagonist. Then next up in the popularity, I have a bit of an honorable mention. I'm not going to build them, but since Sephiroth was 11th on the overall Final Fantasy popularity rankings, number 10 is actually Zack Fair, but since he's more of a character in Crisis Core, I'm not gonna really build him here. Then immediately after 10th, there is number 9 on the overall popularity list. And third for this video, Tifa Lockhart. Tifa is the easiest character to build out of anybody in this entire list. And it's very simple, because she's a monk. You just gotta go with a straight up human monk, throw all your points into dexterity and wisdom just like every monk should, and then it's really just what kind of monk do you want her to be. You could go with more of the elemental kind of monk if you want to focus more on the materia, but that's not really what we're doing with these builds. We just want to focus on the limit breaks, and most of Tifa's limit breaks are just revolving around different ways of punching more or harder, but she does have the Final Heaven ability, and that's really just one big punch. So I would take Way of the Open Hand, or actually post the recent Player's Handbook, it's Warrior of the Open Hand, but it gives you open hand technique, so you can push people or knock them down as part of your flurry of blows, and monks get an insane amount of punches because they can do 2 attacks as their main action, 2 attacks as their bonus action with Flurry of Blows, and then that got upgraded more recently as well. So now at higher levels, you can get 3 attacks with your Flurry of Blows, giving you 5 total attacks. And then Warrior of the Open Hand also gives you Wholeness of Body, so you can regain some hit points, or Fleet Step to dash around a bit better. But most importantly, we want that big punch for Final Heaven. And at level 17 of Warrior of the Open Hand, you get Quivering Palm. This used to be an instant kill, but after the updated version, this now just has a big boatload of damage. So when you hit a creature with an unarmed strike, you can spend 4 focus points, which is just a number of points that you have access to equal to your monk level, and you basically start vibrations when you hit somebody, doing up to 10d12 force damage as part of that hit. But she's obviously very straightforward, just a full 20 levels in monk. Then we have number 3 in the overall popularity list, but number 2 for this video, Aerith Gainsborough. Aerith's limit breaks are pretty heavily focused on healing. She's got the Healing Wind limit break to heal everyone, Seal Evil to paralyze and silence people, Breath of Earth to heal more, Fury Brand to give everyone else their limit breaks, Planet Protector to make everybody invincible, Pulse of Life for more healing, and Great Gospel for a bunch of more healing. And for Aerith, it's definitely a bit tricky, because we're going to take 4 levels to start in Druid, because she is very obviously focused on the planet and nature and growing her flowers. But 4 levels in Druid covers an insane amount of what we need, mostly because at 3rd level of Druid, we get to choose a Druid subclass, and we're going to go with Circle of the Shepherd. This gives us the Spirit Totem ability, and that is one of the easiest ways to get some AoE healing without a higher level spell like Mass Healing Word or Mass Cure Wounds, because the Spirit Totem will also allow us to have options to buff our party if we need to. It creates a 30-foot radius area of effect where you can activate a Bear Spirit to give people temporary hit points and give your allies advantage on strength checks and strength saving throws, or you can use the Hawk Spirit to grant an ally advantage on an attack roll within the area, while also granting all of your allies advantage on perception checks. But for mass healing, which is probably one of the most useful abilities in this general lineup, you can use the Unicorn Spirit. So all of your allies gain advantage on ability checks made to detect creatures in the aura, but more importantly, whenever you cast a spell that restores hit points to any creature inside or outside of the aura, each creature of your choice inside their aura also regains hit points equal to your Druid level. Then to really hammer home the healing, I would multiclass into Cleric. After your 4 levels in Druid, you take 6 levels in Cleric. Focus intensely on healing and go with a Life Cleric. The 6 levels in Cleric gives you Preserve Life, so you have another way to heal creatures for up to 5 times your Cleric level. And at 6th level of being a Life Cleric, you get Blessed Healer. So immediately after you cast a spell with a spell slot that restores hit points, you regain a number of hit points equal to 2 plus the spell slot's level. And then, instead of taking any more levels in Cleric or Druid, you probably just want to throw ahead and stick a pencil through your character sheet and just call it a day and throw that character out. Because as we all know, Aerith doesn't make it very far in the games, and getting to level 10 is probably where you want to max her out if you're staying true to character. So just take those 10 levels overall, focus on healing spells, and make sure to throw a few materia in to make yourself a bit more useful. Then you have the #1 most popular character both in Final Fantasy overall and especially in Final Fantasy VII, Cloud Strife. And when I built Cloud the first time, I focused very heavily on just hitting hard, hitting strong, and hitting as many times as I could by going with a champion fighter. We're not going to go exactly the same route though. You still want to make sure you grab something like the soldier background, because as far as Cloud knows, he was part of soldier, and then still stick with being a fighter, but we need to take a different route because Cloud's limit breaks, Blade Beam, Finishing Touch, Meteor Rain, and Omni Slash give us a few things we need to be able to pick up. When you're building your character in the first place, make sure to grab a feat to cover your Blade Beam. It's really just a bright beam that you blast out of your sword, and I think the best way to do that is with a Magic Initiate feat to make sure that you can get Guiding Bolt. It feels like a blast that you shoot out, and it has some other benefits like giving you advantage on a follow-up attack. But other than that one spell, we can rely on our fighter stuff for basically every other limit break. And then when you level up in fighter, you get a fighting style right away, and you're going to want to take great weapon fighting, making it so you have a higher minimum for your damage when you're swinging a massive sword, because having a Buster Sword is kind of iconic for Cloud, and we can't ignore that. So we're also going to take Weapon Mastery with a Great Sword, allowing us to do damage even when we miss. Then once you hit 3rd level in Fighter, you can get a Fighter subclass, and we're going to go with Eldritch Knight. We need some spells to cover those limit breaks. You want to rain down some meteors, you can go with Melf's Minute Meteors, just like Sephiroth did. You want to use Finishing Touch, which basically creates a giant tornado. There's a 4th level spell called Storm Sphere that's perfect for that. It creates a 20-foot radius sphere of whirling air and deals some bludgeoning damage, while at the same time giving you the opportunity to make ranged spell attacks for some additional lightning damage. And then the only thing that's left is Omni Slash, which is basically just a ton of attacks, and you get that by default for just being a fighter in the first place, because you get 4 attacks by leveling fighter to its maximum. Then you can take Action Search for another 4 attacks. On top of everything else, while you're leveling up, you want to make sure you grab a couple feats, most notably, Great Weapon Master. Great Weapon Master is going to allow you to boost up the damage with a giant sword, and at the same time, giving you a great opportunity to attack as a bonus action, giving you 9 total attacks. You can boost that up even further because now you have access to spell casting and you can cast haste on yourself. And even if you want to do plenty of attacking, but at the same time not ignore your spell casting, you can take 1 cantrip replacing one of your attacks at an early level of being an Eldritch Knight, but all the way at 18th level of being an Eldritch Knight, you get improved War Magic. So you can take the attack action on your turn and replace 2 of your attacks with the casting of 1 1st or 2nd level wizard spell, meaning that you can still get plenty of attacks in while casting. Overall, it's just a very powerful build. I know I just ran through the highlights of every single one of these builds, and I kind of rushed it at certain points, but I just wanted to give some idea of how to make a full party of Final Fantasy characters if you want to make a more Final Fantasy stylized D&D campaign. If you want access to the character sheets, which are far more fleshed out than this video could ever be unless I made it 10 hours long, I have all of those character sheets up on Patreon with all the levels, all the spells, everything. And if you made it all the way to the end of this exceedingly long build, let me know by hitting that like button, and I'll be here helping you roll at least 3 nat 20s in your next D&D session, especially if you want to play any character from Final Fantasy VII.